Hey people, I got cut off in my last video, went past the recording capabilities of my camera, but I just wanted to make a quick conclusion. I'll try not to make this one too long, but I always end up going longer than I hoped. But I was talking about the analemma, and that's this figure 8 pattern here that you can see, and it really appears as though the Earth is stationary and the Sun is moving between the tropics. So it appears like the Earth doesn't move and the Sun moves. That's what we can see. But of course they say that we're moving and that this is caused by the elliptical orbit of the Earth mixed with Earth's supposed tilt. But I've already explained how an ellipse needs two foci, and there's only one. So here's that ellipse again. It needs these two foci, and there's only one. So this is another magical property of gravity and things of this sort. But not just that, also there's a problem with the Earth's supposed tilt, where we know that the equator is the hottest place on Earth. And you see that this is the equator. And you'll notice that if the Sun is 93 million miles away and its rays are arriving parallel, that the hottest place should be the halfway point, because that's going to be the closest to the actual Sun. And on here, that's going to be about right there. But the equator is 23.4 degrees above that horizontal plane where the Sun's rays would be hitting. So that's too high. And they'll tell you that, the temperatures are different from the equator up here because these are farther away from the hottest place on Earth, which is the equator, which should be located lower. It should be located right there. But it's not doing that. But if the Sun's rays were really 93 million, or if the Sun was really 93 million miles away and its rays were arriving parallel, then that would mean that there shouldn't be very much temperature variations anywhere on Earth. It's just not logical. You're talking a difference. The rays come 93 million miles, and over just this 4,000 mile difference, it supposedly changes all kinds, and you get these temperature variations. But that's not really sensical. If the Sun is really just humongous and it's out there and its rays are engulfing the Earth parallel, then everywhere that's lit up by the Sun should have roughly the same temperature. There might be slight variations, but it's not going to change so drastically as you get higher. So the equator should be lower. So that's the problem with the tilt. In the analemma, it actually proves that the Earth doesn't move and that it's the Sun that moves. It proves that the Sun is much smaller than the Earth. It proves a lot of things, but of course they have their magic excuses and answers to talk you out of trusting your own senses there. I'll just show you again on this map my depiction here and how the southern hemisphere would be much larger. That's or the southern circumference, I should say, but it's much larger. That's why this part of the analemma is bigger. And I'll bring this over here so you guys can see. This is on every globe, and like I said, you can see it in your own window or do the photography. But this is much bigger out here. It makes perfect sense on a flat map. And you can look up the voyages of Captain Cook and subsequent voyages where they traveled at least 60,000 miles. Captain Cook was 68,000 miles, and that's much farther than the equator would supposedly be. The equator is supposedly 25,000 miles in circumference. So the distance out here couldn't possibly, or the distance down here, I should say, couldn't possibly, circumnavigating this couldn't possibly end up being farther than the equator. It would be much smaller. So this little ice chunk that they show you on the bottom of the globe, that doesn't match with observations and actual measurements. And I was talking about the parallel rays of the Sun. Well, in the globe model, it was Eratosthenes, and people pronounce his name differently, but I'll just say Eratosthenes, supposedly proved that the Earth was a ball by measuring the parallel rays of the Sun, and he used sticks and shadows at different locations. He used sticks and shadows and showed that there was a difference in the shadow in one location to another, and this supposedly proved that the Earth was a ball. But what they don't teach you is that his measurements can also be used on a flat Earth. So his measurements rely on those rays arriving parallel, but you can look it up. Crepuscular sun's rays, let me actually look it up. But you can see that those rays are not parallel. Forgive me here, let me just look up a picture. Alright, just look at the first one that comes up. You can see that these rays are not parallel. Just look at this one, the first one that comes up. You can see that they're coming at angles. Alright, now they say that this is caused by refraction and diffraction, and other people will say different things, but we know that those rays aren't parallel. So how was Eratosthenes using parallel rays to make his measurements? Well, it can be shown that his exact same measurements can be used on a flat surface, and they'll show you can get the same results, but the conclusion is that the sun is much smaller and much closer. So his measurements don't prove that the Earth is a ball. Even if you want to believe that he was correct and that those rays are parallel, and he's somehow measuring parallel rays when we can prove that they're not parallel, it's not conclusive proof that the Earth is a ball, and people will repeat that over and over. Eratosthenes proved thousands of years ago, but that is not proof. That is one interpretation of the measurements. But we can see that those rays are not parallel. And when people say that it's perspective, they're completely wrong. And this is easy to demonstrate by, if you look at the 9/11 memorial in New York City, when they had the spotlights going, you can see those spotlights, and you can look at it from the side. I'll just show you here. Hold on, there it is. So here we have the rays of the sun and how they're not parallel. Well, when you view them from the side, you can see they're not parallel. When you view the 9/11 memorial and these spotlights going into the sky, you can see that they're perfectly parallel from the same perspective as these rays. So, I mean, it's not parallel, or it's not perspective. Perspective is describing things moving away from you into the horizon, like a railroad track or road will appear to make a triangle. And that's why you see the triangle around the eye on the dollar bill. That's representing why the sun looks like it sets. That triangle is like the railroad tracks, how they appear to make a triangle, and that's how you represent it in 2 dimensions, is with the triangle. But it's not perspective. That's describing things on the horizon from when you're viewing the sun's rays from the side. This is a similar perspective, and you can see something like this, how there's clouds, and here's the city, and these are perfectly parallel, all the way up there. This is not parallel. See, not parallel, parallel. You can see the difference. So Eratosthenes could not possibly have proved that the Earth was a ball using parallel sun rays, and that's what his entire calculations rely on, those parallel sun rays, but we can prove that they're not. And like I said, I don't want to keep you here too long, so I'll just try and go over this last point, that they say that the globe is spinning 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. Okay? But due to the nature of a sphere, or a spheroid, or a geoid, or however you want to put it, the change in speed from pole to equator would be drastic. It would be almost 1,000 miles per hour at the equator and almost 0 at the pole. But you can go from somewhere like Sweden up here, Sweden or Norway, I don't know if you can see those there. You can go from somewhere like that to somewhere near the equator. You can fly there in, however many hours, and you won't notice any change of speed. No change in speed can be measured or detected, and the human body is capable of detecting even the smallest change of speeds, like in an automobile or a plane or anything like that. When you change acceleration and velocity and things, you can feel it, but you don't notice any change when you travel from north to south. So that's another coincidence. I mean, just the motions that we're said to be spinning and flying at, it's really a coincidence that you can't feel it, because you get on a merry-go-round and you spin around and you don't even go, 20 miles an hour, and you get off and you're all sick and dizzy. but somehow you can spin and fly around at all these crazy speeds and not even be able to detect it or measure it or anything like that. And that's just, it's completely nonsensical, but they teach us from the time that we're kids that we're spinning and you just can't feel it. So we accept it. Just like someone in an African tribe where they're cannibals and they go out head hunting, those kids, they don't think there's anything strange about the way that they were brought up. So you just accept reality of whatever you're presented. So it's just quite a coincidence that there's all these motions, but they can't be detected, felt, or measured, or anything like that. And then of course, I mean, you have the fact that all of these oceans are supposedly being held on the bottom of a supersonic spinning ball, but you can't prove gravity. You can't prove this force, and I mean it holds these things down. But you can easily overcome it just by jumping, and a little fly can fly away, or even like a huge jumbo jet can fly. But you can't prove that. The reason people and continents and things are not flying off of the bottom of this is because of some force. And it's funny too, because when you actually get into the mathematics of it, the equations for the actual force or acceleration emitted by gravity is something like, what is it, like 10 times 1.3 something to the negative 10th power or whatever. It's really just a very, very fancy way of saying zero. But it's giving you a real number that you can put into your equations, but it's not going to interfere with anything else. It's such a small number that you can put it in there and it's not going to really affect anything. But if they told you zero, which is what it is, there isn't actually a force of gravity, then it would screw up your equations. So it's just a way of giving you a real number as close to zero as possible. But like I've been saying, there just isn't any way to prove the actual Earth is moving. And this is just another one of these impossible coincidences that we could be experiencing all of these motions and not feel them. So keep all of these things in mind. Just because somebody gives you an answer for something and says that, the reason why the supermoon looks closer is because the moon is rotating in an ellipse, that doesn't mean that that's true. They could come up with a whole model and show you how that would work, but that doesn't mean that that's what we observe or that's actually what's going on. So it's always important to think for yourself and to remember that all of the so-called evidence of the globe and the heliocentric model relies on theories. Unprovable theories. It relies on equations that don't necessarily have any relation to reality. So you have to put this into perspective. Are you going to keep believing everything that you're told just because it's an answer? Are you just going to accept answers because NASA and these scientists give you answers? Or are you going to actually think for yourself and see why a lot of their answers can't even make sense? And they're not provable. That's the big thing, is that science is supposed to be reaching conclusions based on observable evidence, and we're so far removed from that now that there isn't any actual evidence for it. And they teach in schools these things, dark matter and dark energy and all these things, as if they're real, but there isn't a shred of proof. The fact is that they need these to make their equations work. Something like dark matter, for instance, they say that there isn't enough gravity to explain their model, so they have to add something else. The math doesn't add up, so they say, well, there must be dark matter there. But there isn't any proof. It doesn't make any sense. Just like the fourth dimension in Einstein, there's no proof that there's another dimension. There's no proof that there's this fabric of space-time, but they needed it for their model. And they tell you that, and they teach it to you as reality, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is reality. So just keep these things in mind. I'm going to go ahead and end it here so that I'm not keeping you here all day, but I didn't necessarily touch on all the impossible coincidences, and some of them I might not have elaborated as well as I should have.